All he ever wanted was to see his canine dog one last time. Not freedom, not forgiveness. Just those familiar eyes, that old fur, and a memory that never faded. Caleb Morgan, a former canine trainer, was sentenced to death after a mysterious fire. For 5 years behind bars, he asked for just one thing. And just when it seemed like his request might finally be granted, what happened next left everyone speechless. Can a memory come back? Can a dog carry the truth? If you've ever believed that dogs never forget, stay with Dog Stories and hit subscribe to support us. We truly appreciate it. And this is where it all began, not in a courtroom, but with a name the world had long forgotten. Brisco. In a cell buried deep within the death row block of Northridge State Prison, a flickering strip of fluorescent light seeped through a crack in the ceiling, casting a faint beam across the cold concrete floor. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the ticking of a clock from the guardroom, each tick sounding like a countdown to the end of a life. Caleb Morgan, 52, sat motionless on a rusted single-iron bed. His hands rested gently on his thighs, wrists marked with the grime and faint scars left by cuffs that had bitten into his skin for too long. His face was quiet, not angry, not bitter, just the kind of silence that comes from someone who's gotten used to living with a sentence. Not the one on paper, but the one in people's eyes. 5 years ago, Caleb was convicted of setting fire to the police evidence warehouse, the same department where he'd spent nearly 2 decades as a canine handler. One night, flames tore through the building, destroying key evidence and claiming the life of a junior officer. At the time, Caleb was already under disciplinary review for disrupting unit cohesion, and he became the scapegoat. No alibi, no witnesses. He was sentenced to death after a trial that lasted barely 10 days. They called him the traitor trainer. But there was one soul who never turned on him: Brisco. That morning, the prison warden, a tall man with eyes like cold steel, stood outside Caleb's cell holding a piece of paper titled Last Request Form. "What do you want for your final day?" he asked, voice flat, like he was taking a breakfast order. Caleb looked him straight in the eye, unblinking. He spoke slowly, clearly, as if each word carried the weight of a final breath. "I don't want a meal. I just want to see Brisco one last time." Brisco was a German shepherd trained in the canine unit from a young age. Caleb was the first to teach him how to detect explosives, read hand signals, tell the difference between real gunfire, and even understand human emotions without a single word. They were nearly the perfect team. No commands needed, just a look. Caleb used to joke, "If my wife understood me half as well as Brisco does, I wouldn't be divorced." After Caleb's arrest, Brisco was sent to the canine retirement shelter at Hollow Creek, a place where most service dogs lived out the rest of their days. Some said Brisco stopped eating for days after his handler was taken away. Others swore that every time he heard the sound of military boots echo down the hallway, he'd leap up like he was waiting for someone to come home. Brisco couldn't speak, but he remembered, and he waited. That final request stunned the prison staff. Inmates usually asked for their favorite meal, a cigar, maybe one last movie. No one had ever asked to see a dog. The warden set the paper down on his desk, thought for a moment, then nodded. "If it's his last request, we'll make it happen." But a young guard in the room leaned over and whispered to his buddy, "Is he losing it? What's a dog gonna do?" The other replied, just as quietly, "Who knows? Maybe it's all he's got left." They thought Caleb was crazy, that someone facing death and asking only to see a dog must be out of his mind, or just pathetically alone. What they didn't know was that strange request was the key to a secret buried for 5 years. A secret that could turn everything they thought they knew upside down. In a worn-out corner of the Hollow Creek shelter, Brisco lay curled on the cold concrete floor, eyes half closed, half alert, like he was still waiting for a command from the handler who'd vanished years ago. It all started with a wish that seemed odd. No one could have guessed that one wish would shake the entire system. Early sunlight was just beginning to peek over the quiet suburbs of Fairgrove County, Indiana, when the landline rang in the small office of Hollow Creek Rescue Center, a retirement home for working dogs. Hundreds of dogs who once served in the military, police force, and search and rescue teams now spent their final days here. No more sirens, no more commands, just time and memories. Nina Bell, 27, a caretaker at the center, had just finished making coffee when she stepped over and picked up the phone. A deep, steady male voice came through the line. "This is Northridge Prison. We're calling to confirm. Do you currently have a dog named Brisco, German Shepherd, formerly part of the K9 unit?" Nina paused, slightly caught off guard. "Yes, we do. Brisco's here." "Is something wrong?" "We've received a final request from an inmate named Caleb Morgan. He's asked to see Brisco. That's the only thing he wants before his execution. Our warden has approved it." A silence hung on the line. Nina slowly set her coffee down, a heaviness settling in her chest. "We'll be coming to pick up the dog tomorrow morning." Brisco wasn't a loud or clingy dog. He was quiet, rarely barked, but had an uncanny sensitivity to the emotions around him. Nina had never seen him get close to anyone, except when he heard one name, Caleb. The next morning, as the prison transport vehicle pulled up to the gate, Nina headed straight to the row of kennels where Brisco stayed. In her hand was his working collar and a bag of his favorite snacks. But when she got there, the kennel door was wide open. She froze, then rushed in, calling out, "Brisco, where are you, buddy?" No sound, no bark, no clinking chain. The kennel was empty. Brisco's old blanket was still there, but there were no paw prints, no scratches, no sign of a struggle or panic. Everything was too quiet, too clean, like he hadn't even been there the night before. Nina turned around, eyes scanning the empty hallway. A chill crept down her spine. She moved quickly along the kennel row, checking every door, every lock. Everything was untouched, except Brisco's. His was the only one left open. She crouched down close to the concrete floor, gently brushing her fingers over a thin layer of dust. A footprint. Not large, about the size of an average man's, but there was only one, heading toward the side door that led to the back parking lot. She ran in that direction. The door was closed, but the latch was loose. Someone had opened it, then quietly shut it behind them. Back in the office, Nina powered up the computer and pulled up the security footage. She rewound through the last 12 hours. But just as she remembered, Brisco's kennel wasn't covered by any of the cameras. She switched to the overnight staff log. Every entry said the same thing. Nothing unusual. No strange noises. No dogs barking in alarm, not even the ones known for reacting to the slightest sound. That was the strangest part. Brisco vanished, and not a single dog reacted. Only two possibilities made sense. One, whoever took him knew dogs, knew them well. Two, Brisco went willingly, but why? In the middle of the night, just hours before he was supposed to see the one person he'd bonded with his entire life? Nina sank into the chair, her mind spinning. She suddenly remembered the man she'd spoken to 3 days earlier, the one who had stared at Brisco's kennel for way too long. He wore a black coat, metal-rimmed glasses, spoke softly, but there was something off about his eyes. He'd said he was interested in learning about the old K9 training program, but his questions about Brisco had been oddly specific. That dog, it was at the fire scene, wasn't it? At the time, Nina had chalked it up to curiosity, but now she wasn't so sure. Later that afternoon, when the center had cleared out, Nina went back to Brisco's kennel. This time, she combed through every inch, leaving nothing unchecked. And then she saw it, a broken piece of chain, tucked into the corner behind a pile of dry straw. The metal clasp was bent, not worn down or snapped from age, but twisted by force. She picked it up, brought it closer. Caught on the hook was a single black hair, the exact shade of Brisco's coat. Her heart started racing. There was no doubt now Brisco didn't leave on his own, and whoever took him knew exactly how to cover their tracks. Dusk had begun to settle. Nina stood alone in the middle of the shelter yard, her shadow stretching long across the worn brick ground under the fading light. Somewhere off in the distance, the roar of a motorcycle echoed, then faded into silence. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. Brisco wasn't just any dog. He was the only living witness to a case the whole country once called the betrayal from within. And Caleb, the handler he'd once protected with his life, was now waiting in a death row cell, every minute ticking closer. She pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. Her finger paused on a name she hadn't called in a long time. Eli Hayes, former logistics officer at the Fairgrove Police Department. She hit dial. A raspy voice picked up after 2 rings. "Nina? Been a while?" She said just one thing. "Brisco's gone, and I think someone doesn't want Caleb to see him again." That call to Eli wasn't planned, it was pure instinct. Suspicion and gut feeling pushed her to act before she even knew where to start. But back at the shelter, despite everything, the official process continued like nothing had happened. Early the next morning, in the admin office of Hollow Creek, the center's manager dialed the Northridge prison hotline to make an official report. He asked to see his dog, Brisco, the manager said, tension tightening his voice. But the problem is, he disappeared the night before we were supposed to bring him in. On the other end of the line, at Northridge Prison, the warden froze with his pen midair. A blink. Then he set the receiver down, left his office, and walked down the dim corridor toward death row cell number 6. The door opened. Caleb Morgan was still seated, hands resting on his knees, the pale light from the ceiling casting shadows over his sun-worn, deeply lined face. He didn't turn as the footsteps entered the room. "Caleb," the warden said, "we spoke with the shelter. They agreed to send Brisco to see you." A pause, but the dog disappeared before our team could arrive. This time, Caleb turned his head. His eyes weren't angry, they weren't panicked, just heavy with a thick, unmoving silence, like he'd already suspected the truth, but had still been holding out hope it wouldn't come to this. He didn't ask any questions. He just whispered, "He'd never leave me, something's wrong." At that same moment, across town, Nina was leaning against a payphone pole outside an old gas station near Hollow Creek. Night had settled in. She pulled her coat tighter as the wind cut through, her hand clutching a slip of paper with a license plate she'd just found buried in the security guard's old notes. ZKJ 24/7. That strange man, the one who asked about Brisco, had a heavy, uneven gait, a slight limp in his left leg, and a distinct scent of old-style cologne, like smoked oak. But it was the dark gray car parked near the fence that day that stuck with her most. Nina dialed. "Eli Hayes," came the low, raspy voice, carrying the weight of someone used to long days. "It's me, Nina." A short beat. "Yeah, what's going on?" She read the number slowly. "I need to know who this car belongs to. ZKJ 2047. You still have contacts at the DMV?" "Don't work there anymore," Eli replied, "but I still know how to look. Give me an hour." While she waited, Nina headed back to the shelter. She couldn't sit still. Her mind kept looping the same details over and over. Brisco vanishing the day before he was supposed to see Caleb. No signs of forced entry. No one saw a thing. No barking. And that strange man showing up exactly 3 days earlier, then disappearing like he'd never been there at all. She stepped into Brisco's old kennel again, this time with a flashlight in hand. The beam scanned every corner, every crack. Then, under the blanket she'd thought was empty before, something caught her eye, a small folded piece of paper, tucked tight against the wall. She unfolded it. One rushed, slanted line of handwriting stared back at her. "Brisco knows more than he should. Be careful." Nina's hands trembled. Outside, the wind howled through the cracks in the door like a warning. An hour later, Eli called back. The car's registered to a logistics company that shut down 3 years ago. It was under the name Evermark Freight, but the current listed address leads to an empty lot. "Can you find out who used the car?" "Not yet, but here's the part that matters. This car was scanned by the internal security system of the Fairgrove Police Department." Nina froze. "You mean?" "Most likely, whoever's been using that car either used to work at the department or still has access to restricted areas. And if he's the one who asked about Brisco, then he knew exactly what he was looking for," Nina whispered. That night, Nina quietly locked the shelter gates, but didn't go home. She sat alone in the monitoring room, lights off, the only glow coming from her laptop screen. She began digging through Caleb Morgan's case files, old news articles, archived broadcasts, crime scene photos from the warehouse fire all those years ago. One image made her stop. It was a shot of the aftermath, debris, scorch marks, twisted steel. But in the background, if you looked closely, there was a dog, pulling at something lodged in the wall. The face wasn't clear, but the coat, black with silver-gray trim, drooped ears, that alert, braced stance, it was Brisco. Meanwhile, in another corner of Northridge Prison, Caleb sat in silence inside his cell, eyes fixed on the cracked ceiling above. He couldn't sleep. In his mind, he still heard Brisco's paws hitting the tile floor, the soft bark of recognition when he picked up on a silent command, the warmth of his fur curled beside Caleb's leg during those freezing patrol nights. It was all still there, as real as ever. He knew Brisco hadn't left him. Not a chance. Someone had taken him. Not out of affection, but to keep something hidden. And now, Caleb was running out of time. Across the city, while he sat wrestling with that truth in his cold cell, miles away, Nina and Eli were already on the trail of the first real lead. A strange license plate, and an address tied to a place most people had long forgotten. The dirt road out to the edges of Wyatt County was so narrow the car's side mirrors brushed against overgrown weeds. Eli's truck rolled forward slowly, front tires dodging deep potholes as thick mud splattered across the windshield. The rain had just let up that morning, leaving the air damp and heavy with the smell of wet earth. Nina sat in the passenger seat, gripping the printout with the vehicle registration info. The company name, Evermark Freight, was nothing but a front. The address had been quietly updated 3 months ago, pointing to an abandoned farm on the edge of the county. Even Google Maps only showed it in faded outlines, like a ghost on an old photo. "You're sure this is the last place the car was tracked?" Nina asked. Eli nodded, eyes fixed on the road ahead. Traffic cam caught it turning down this road around 2 a.m. The morning Brisco disappeared. No data after that, like it vanished. "Or like someone made sure it wasn't seen again," Nina said, narrowing her eyes as a rusted iron gate came into view. The farm had clearly been lived in once, that much was obvious. A few rotted wooden signs hung crooked on the fence line. A toppled water tank lay beside a collapsed grain shed. Grass had grown high enough to brush their knees. No sound. Just the wind rustling and the creak of a barn door swaying on rusty hinges. Eli cut the engine. They stepped out. Nina pulled a flashlight from her coat pocket, the beam sweeping across the front of the main barn. The wooden door wasn't locked, just barely closed. She pushed it open. Inside, it was pitch black. The smell hit them immediately, a mix of musty rot and metallic tang. On the dirt floor near the far wall was a clump of coarse black dog fur, thick, wiry, exactly like Brisco's. "There was a chain here," Eli said, pointing to a support post in the corner. A rusted chain lay stretched across the ground, its end still fastened to a metal ring locked into the base of the post. Nearby sat a dented metal bowl, with a few pieces of moldy kibble still clinging to the edge. Nina stepped closer, kneeling down. Her hand shook slightly as she picked up a piece of fur tangled with straw. The root was still damp, it hadn't been there long. "Brisco was kept here," she whispered. "But they moved him." Eli scanned the room. In a hurry. They didn't clean up. Because they knew someone was coming. Nina moved toward the back of the barn, where faint light filtered through a crack in the roof. Then she stopped cold. On the dusty concrete floor there was a faint, dark stain, reddish-brown, no bigger than a coin. But it definitely wasn't mud. She didn't say a word. Carefully she reached into her backpack, pulling out a small plastic bag and a cotton swab, tools she'd used before during emergency rescues. She gently dabbed the stain, sealed the sample. "Blood," she said quietly. "I'm taking it for testing." "Could be Brisco's?" Eli asked. "Could be someone else's. But blood in a place used to hold a dog isn't random." Eli stood beside her, his expression heavy. "You think they moved Brisco somewhere else?" "I don't know yet. But I'm starting to believe this wasn't just a simple abduction. Someone's making damn sure Brisco never sees Caleb again, whatever it takes." On the drive back to town, Nina stayed silent. Her hand rested on the small evidence bag in her lap, eyes locked on the window as the empty fields blurred past. Something was deeply wrong, and she had to find out what before it was too late. As Eli's truck turned onto the road leading back into town, night had completely settled over the sky. In Nina's hands was the small sealed bag, holding the blood sample she'd collected from the floor of the abandoned barn. She looked at it like she was holding a puzzle piece no one else remembered existed. At the other end of this story, Caleb Morgan still sat quietly in his death row cell, back against the wall, the dim yellow light casting shadows across a face hardened by time and solitude. In his mind, the past wasn't memory anymore. It was pain, replaying in full detail, sound by sound. 5 years ago, Fairgrove Police Department. Caleb, then a veteran K-9 handler, had been part of a covert internal investigation. He and Brisco were assigned to a classified operation looking into corruption inside the department. suspicions of drug trafficking, illegal weapons storage, and money laundering. At the center of it all was a group of high-ranking officers, men who wore integrity on their sleeves but had been manipulating the system from within. Caleb wasn't the confrontational type, but he couldn't look the other way when he started noticing swapped evidence packages, misplaced materials, and blatantly doctored financial reports. He filed internal complaints, quietly passed information to federal investigators, believing that justice, eventually, would protect itself. Brisco was always by his side. During surprise inspections, during quiet raids that no one ever knew about, that loyal dog was Caleb's second set of eyes. No one paid attention to the dog, and that was their biggest mistake. Brisco had sniffed out gunpowder stashed beneath the evidence room tiles. He'd found hollowed-out evidence crates sealed up to look untouched. But when the investigation started creeping into the department's upper ranks, everything changed. One night, the evidence warehouse exploded. Burned to the ground, nothing left. By morning, Caleb was in handcuffs at his front door. They said he was at the scene that night, that his fingerprints were found on the storage room door, that the security system had been disabled using access codes tied to his login. No one mentioned Brisco. The dog was reported as relocated for retraining. That same night, Brisco vanished from the department like he'd never been there. No one listened to Caleb's side. No one questioned the connections between the officers he'd reported and the warehouse that went up in flames. To the public, Caleb was just another dirty cop destroying evidence to save himself. To those who once trusted him, it was a betrayal they never saw coming. And as for Brisco, no one knew what that dog had seen the night the flames lit up the sky. Present day. When the final result flashed on the lab screen, Nina held her breath. The test had just come back from the veterinary lab she'd trusted for years. The blood sample wasn't from a dog, it was human. And even more shocking, the lab's automatic DNA database flagged a match. Travis Denton, former lieutenant, supervisor of the evidence locker, officially declared dead in the warehouse fire 5 years ago. Nina frowned. If Denton died in the fire, why is his blood showing up in an abandoned barn this week? Eli glanced over, something clicking into place. Either Denton never died, or someone faked his death to cover up something even bigger. Nina's mind jumped back to the note hidden under Brisco's blanket. Brisco knows more than he should. Be careful. In his cell, Caleb still couldn't sleep. The memory of that night burned in his lungs like the fire was still raging. He had gone to the evidence warehouse. That part was true, but not to destroy anything, to meet someone from the task force. Someone who claimed there was critical evidence that needed Caleb's confirmation before it could be turned over to the feds. But when he arrived, the lights were off. The security cameras were dead. No one was there, except Brisco, who suddenly bolted into the building, alert and tense, like he sensed something was wrong. Then, the explosion. Brisco vanished. Caleb woke up later, sprawled behind the department's back parking lot, his head bleeding, shirt scorched, and a strange handgun lying beside him. Someone had staged the whole thing. Nina tapped lightly on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the road ahead. We have to find Brisco before someone else does. He's not just a dog, he's a living witness. Eli let out a quiet sigh. The problem is, we're up against something way bigger than us. Nina's reply came low, steady. Then that's all the more reason to see it through. Back in the death row cell, Caleb Morgan hadn't slept a minute. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard the blast. The warehouse fire still echoed in his memory like it happened yesterday. But this time, something else was clawing at him more than the past. Brisco. He felt it in his bones. The dog was still alive, and he believed, deeply, quietly, that Brisco was trying to find his way back. Miles away, Eli and Nina sat quietly in an old pickup truck parked near Wesleyport. In Eli's hands was a weathered GPS tracker, one that had just picked up a faint, flickering signal from a backup chip once embedded in Brisco's tactical collar. "Signal's weak," Eli murmured, eyes locked on the tiny screen. "But it's there, and it's coming from somewhere inside this old warehouse complex." Nina scanned the derelict industrial park. Dozens of rusted tin buildings lined the road, swallowed in shadows and sea fog drifting in from the coast. The silence was thick, almost chilling. "We might be watched," she said under her breath. Eli gave a slow nod. And if Briscoe's really here, he's not alone. They killed the headlights and stepped out, moving on foot toward Warehouse 3, the strongest ping location. As they got closer, Eli tugged Nina behind a wall, signaling her to stay quiet. A flashlight beam slid across a shattered window. There were people inside. And from somewhere in the distance, voices began to rise, low, sharp, and unmistakably human. "Check the chain again. He said that dog doesn't move an inch. Relax. If it growls again, I'll shove a tranquilizer down its throat." Nina clenched her fists. "We can't go in through the front," Eli whispered. "But I've seen the old layout of these warehouses. There's a vent in the back, just big enough for someone to squeeze through." Minutes later, they slipped along the narrow path behind the building, finding a busted ventilation grate half covered by an old shipping container. Eli pulled the screen off. Nina slid in first. It was pitch dark inside, but from the high vantage point, she could see below. Brisco was lying against the far wall, chained to a steel post, muzzle strapped tight around his snout. Two men in black jackets, guns at their hips, stood nearby, smoking, whispering. "What's so special about this mutt that he wants it alive?" "Word is it was at the fire. Might remember a face or something. Don't ask, just follow orders." Brisco wasn't sleeping. He was staring, straight at the corner of the ceiling where Nina crouched. She turned to Eli. "He sees us." Eli pressed a small folding knife into her palm. "I'll cause a distraction. You circle around and unlock him. Don't do anything reckless. Don't worry, I've got a plan." Eli kicked a metal drum near the rear door, hard. The loud crash echoed through the warehouse. "What the hell was that?" one of the men snapped, reaching for his weapon. "Someone's outside." One of the guards stepped out to check. Eli crouched behind a stack of crates, waiting. The moment the man passed, Eli struck, swift and hard, dropping him in seconds. Nina slid down through the vent, landing quietly, her breath tight. She crept toward Brisco from behind the remaining guard. Her hands trembled, but she managed to pull out the lockpick Eli had given her. Brisco reacted instantly, not with a bark or movement, but with a quick glance to the left, sharp and deliberate, as if signaling, "There's something over there." The collar popped open. The muzzle came off. The guard noticed movement from the flashlight beam, but too late. Brisco lunged, not to bite, but to knock the man off balance. The impact sent him sprawling. Eli was already behind him, grabbing his collar and slamming him to the ground. In 20 seconds, the warehouse was silent again. But all three of them were breathing like they'd just sprinted 100 yards. Brisco walked slowly up to Nina. He was shaking at first. Then he nudged his head into her hand and let out a soft whine. "You made it? You're okay, buddy?" Nina whispered, voice tight. But Brisco wasn't done. He turned and bolted toward the back of the warehouse, stopping at a rotting section of wall. He growled low and scratched at the base, clearly trying to tell them something. "Eli, over there," Nina said, already moving. They shined their lights, revealing an old storage panel, sealed shut but recently disturbed. It looked like it had been pried open and hastily shut again. Nina didn't have time to dig further. She snapped a few quick photos, burned the location into memory. "We come back for this. Right now, we get Brisco out." When the three of them made it back to the truck, Brisco jumped into the back seat, panting hard but with eyes sharp and focused. Eli glanced at him, half joking, half serious. "I'm still not sure if he's a dog or a damn spy." Nina turned to look at the dog who had stayed loyal to Caleb through everything. "Doesn't matter what he is," she said. "What matters is he's back." Brisco lay still on a thick towel spread out across the floor of an old motel room Eli had rented on the edge of town. The place reeked of damp carpet. The curtains were sun-faded gray, and water stains bloomed like bruises across the ceiling. But right now, it was the safest place they had. Nina knelt beside the dog, dipping a cloth in warm water, gently wiping away the crusted mud and grime from his thick coat. Brisco didn't flinch. He didn't move. He just looked at her. Calm, alert eyes locked on hers, as if he knew exactly where he was. And that he was in the middle of a fight he couldn't explain. He couldn't speak, but he could remember. As Nina reached the old tactical collar around Brisco's neck, the kind issued only to elite K9 units, she paused. The stitching was worn, the leather cracked in places, but near the base, almost flush with the lining, was a tiny metal latch. Odd. Easy to miss unless you knew exactly what to look for. She tilted her head. "This isn't standard issue. Ely, sitting behind her and flipping through photos they took at the warehouse, looked up. You find something? Looks like a hidden lock mechanism, Nina said, pulling a small knife from her pocket. She carefully cut along the collar's inner lining. A soft click. Inside was a waterproof rubber compartment, just large enough to hold one thing, a micro SD card. Nina and Eli locked eyes. Someone hid this here, Eli muttered, and if they went to this much trouble, they didn't want anyone else finding it. And they trusted Brisco to keep it safe. All these years, Nina said quietly. They slid the card into a reader and connected it to the laptop. One folder appeared on the screen. Inside, just a single file, audio079.mp3. Eli clicked play. Static crackled at first. Then voices. Clear, unedited, and real. The first voice, deep, commanding, the kind used to giving orders. We've cleared out the entire evidence vault. Morgan showed up on time? Another male voice responded, softer, lower, uneasy. Yeah, but he's suspicious. His dog sniffed out the new camera setup. Doesn't matter. As long as he's there at detonation. The surveillance backup's already wiped. No one sees our faces. Caleb takes the fall. And as long as the original footage stays buried, this ends here. Click. Eli hit pause. Silence. Then Nina breathed out, eyes wide. There is an original recording, and they were scared it would get out, Eli said. So they framed Caleb and hunted Brisco. Or both, Nina replied. Nina stepped back, still gripping the memory card like it might shatter if she let go. We need to get this out. Now. We can't hang on to it. To who? Eli asked. Miriam Locke, Nina said without hesitation. Human rights attorney, specializes in wrongful convictions. I worked with her as a research assistant 3 years ago. Eli pulled out his phone, switched on the hotspot. Send it. Encrypt the file, use a VPN, and whatever you do, don't use your personal email. Nina nodded. Within minutes, the audio was compressed, encrypted, and sent through a secure channel. She typed a short message to go with it. Caleb Morgan case. New evidence. Listen immediately. Nina Bell. Brisco still lay quietly in the corner, his head resting against the leg of the table. But something in his eyes had changed, not the confused, shaken look he had back in that warehouse. Now it was calm, steady, like he knew things were finally falling into place. The world doesn't let dogs testify, Nina whispered. But this time, you spoke louder than anyone expected. A soft chime rang from the laptop. Nina opened the reply. Received, it's clear. Strong enough for an emergency appeal. Call me now. ML. Eli looked at her, voice rough with disbelief. Did we just pull Caleb out of death row? Nina didn't answer right away. She looked at Brisco. And in that moment, she felt it. All the years buried in silence, the false accusations, the doubts, the walls that had closed in on one man and his dog. Finally cracking open. Not for glory, not for headlines, but for one man and the dog who was never allowed to speak. The night wind slipped through the cracks in the motel window. Outside, a light rain had begun to fall. But inside, between the glow of the laptop screen and Brisco curled up on the towel, there was a silence filled with hope. The first step had been taken. Now there was only one question left. Who left that memory card? And who's trying to get it back? The night hadn't lifted yet, but the lights inside attorney Miriam Locke's office had been on for over 3 hours. On her desk sat the Caleb Morgan case file. Beside it, her laptop played the audio Nina had sent on loop, the firm voice repeating again and again. Caleb takes the fall, as long as no one finds the original footage. Miriam sipped her now cold coffee, eyes locked on the screen as she typed out the emergency appeal. She'd reopened wrongful convictions before, gone head-to-head with powers that bent justice to their will. But none of those cases had hit with this kind of urgency. Every keystroke felt like a punch against the machine someone had spent years trying to hide. By dawn, the case file had been submitted to the state court, along with the new piece of evidence, the memory card containing the audio recording. Stamped across the front, urgent, life at stake. 2 hours later, the phone rang inside the administrative office of Northridge Prison. Down the death row corridor, Caleb Morgan stood still, hands cuffed in front of him, 2 guards at his side. He didn't resist. He didn't struggle. But his eyes, no longer hollow like they'd been for years, held something steady, something unshaken. Just as they reached the final turn toward the execution chamber, a voice called out from the far end of the hall. Stop. A tall man in uniform stepped into view, followed by another wearing a state court badge, the county sheriff, and a representative from the state court. Take him back to his cell. Execution is on hold. One of the guards froze. Reason? The sheriff held out a stamped document, new evidence, and a direct order from the court. Caleb stood frozen. For a moment, he couldn't believe what he'd just heard. Then slowly, his eyes shifted, from disbelief to hope, from numbness to light. That afternoon, the prison yard opened for the first time in years for something unprecedented. To let a man on death row step outside, not to die, but to reunite with a part of himself. Caleb walked out, his hands still cuffed, but no one was holding on to him. The two escorts followed silently, without a word. In front of him was an open yard, a low fence separating it from the overgrown field beyond. And there stood Brisco. The German shepherd stood perfectly still, like stone. But the moment his eyes locked onto his former handler, his body launched forward like a live wire. "Brisco!" Caleb shouted, his voice breaking, hoarse, but pulsing with life for the first time in years. Brisco charged forward without needing to be called again. He leapt over the fence, tore through the dry grass, and launched himself into the arms of the old man standing with arms wide open, waiting. Two bodies, one a soldier, the other a four-legged warrior, folded into each other in the middle of the prison yard, like there had never been distance, never been chains. Caleb collapsed to the ground, not because Brisco was too strong, but because he wanted to. He wanted to kneel, to bury his face in that thick fur, to feel the breath, the heartbeat he thought he'd never feel again. "You never left me." "I knew it," he whispered. Brisco didn't bark. He let out a soft whine, pressing his head into Caleb's chest, tail wagging wildly. His whole body trembled like a wave crashing in, trying to say everything those long years had held inside. From a distance, Nina stood beside Eli and attorney Miriam Locke. None of them spoke. The late afternoon sun cut through the chain-link fence, casting a golden beam across the scene of reunion. "That moment," Miriam said quietly, "is worth more than any verdict I've ever seen." Eli nodded. "And maybe it's the first time he's really been able to breathe." Nina didn't say anything. She just looked at Brisco, the dog who had carried a secret around his neck for 5 years, pushing past fear, instinct, and survival, just to see the one person he trusted most. Behind them, the sheriff approached Caleb and unlocked the cuffs from his wrists. "You're not fully free yet, Caleb," he said, "but we're committing to reopening the case, from the beginning." Caleb didn't look at him. He looked at Brisco and quietly said, "As long as I get to see him again, I can wait for the rest." News of Caleb Morgan's temporary release after 5 years on death row exploded across the media like a bombshell. New evidence, hidden in the collar of a retired K-9, changes the course of a death penalty case. Man once sentenced to die may now be innocent. A dog and a recording uncover a conspiracy inside law enforcement. National networks, major papers, true crime podcasts. Everyone raced to cover the story. But beyond the noise, a new investigation began, quietly. This time, led by the federal government itself. In the shadows, someone was panicking. Warren Beckett, former deputy chief of the Fairgrove Police Department, once said to have taken an early retirement due to health reasons, was now at the center of a quietly growing investigation. Internal leaks of the audio recording, combined with long-buried case files, were beginning to map out a coordinated conspiracy, not just targeting Caleb, but tied to dozens of evidence-tampering cases and staged crime scenes over nearly a decade. Nina, even after handing over the memory card and all supporting information to attorney Miriam Locke, couldn't shake a sense of unfinished business. Who hid the card in Brisco's collar? That question still wouldn't let go. She went back, digging through archival photos of Brisco during his time in service, combing through records of those who had worked closely with Caleb and Brisco in the K-9 unit. And then she stopped at one name. Daniel Kerr, a logistics officer, the one who maintained equipment for the K-9 team, reported missing the night of the warehouse fire, presumed dead while attempting to save evidence. But the death report? It listed only one witness, Warren Beckett. Nina pulled up the asset recovery list from the night of the fire. On it, Brisco's tracking device was marked retrieved, but there was no record of who logged it in. And the collar, the very same collar, was never returned to the logistics department. She turned to Eli. Daniel hid the card in Briscoe's collar, and then he was silenced. Eli went still, and Beckett staged the whole thing, even his death. At that exact moment, in a quiet wooden cabin on the edge of the evergreen forest, Briscoe, lying beside Caleb, suddenly stood up, letting out a low growl. Not a bark, a warning. Minutes later, Eli called, "Someone's watching the house. Don't go outside tonight." Caleb understood instantly. That night, an unmarked SUV pulled up at the forest's edge. 2 men in black stepped out, silent, armed. But the cabin? Empty. Caleb, Briscoe, Nina, and Eli had already slipped away, thanks to the backup GPS tracker Eli had installed the day they brought Briscoe home. This time, they didn't run. They uploaded everything: data, images, conspiracy records, and the audio file, fully encrypted and distributed across open-source platforms built for investigative journalism. At the same time, a complete, unedited copy was sent directly to federal prosecutors. The next morning, Warren Beckett was arrested at his suburban home outside Atlanta, just as he was preparing for a long vacation in Europe. Authorities seized a cache of confidential documents, duplicate records from the evidence room fire, and proof that he'd been tracking Nina, Eli, and Caleb for weeks. 2 weeks later, at a special hearing, Caleb Morgan was officially cleared of all criminal charges. The court declared, not only was Mr. Caleb Morgan a victim of procedural failure, he was framed, used as a scapegoat by a deeply corrupted system. As he left the courthouse, Caleb turned to the crowd of reporters and said just one sentence: "I just wanted to go home to my dog. The rest, nobody owes me an apology." A few months later, the cabin by the woods was quiet again. No more floodlights, no more choppers overhead. Just the sound of morning birds and the soft crackle of the fireplace. Caleb woke early. He made coffee, poured half into his old mug and the other half into a metal bowl for Briscoe. The dog lay on the porch, eyes half closed, ears still tuned to every sound. Caleb returned to his desk and pulled out a stack of papers. Letters, but not ones meant to be sent. They were the final words he needed to write, not for anyone else to read, but to give himself closure. "I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope the truth is seen. And thank you to my dog, Briscoe, the only one who never left me." Some truths stay buried for years. Some people use power to erase the evidence. But sometimes, justice doesn't come from a courtroom. It comes from loyalty, memory, and instincts that can't be bought. Briscoe couldn't speak, but he told the whole story. What do you think about Briscoe's loyalty? Have you ever believed that a dog could actually save a life? Drop a comment below, and if you believe stories like this deserve to be shared, hit that subscribe button and support dog stories. Thanks for staying with us through the end.